I-Dentit-Is. I am what my identity is. My name is Rafa, and this is I-Dentit-Is. A space for those that proudly, fully embrace their identities, but also for those that are willing to do so, but are struggling to let the voices in their head, but also those belonging to human beings. Shut the hell up! Guests, identities, stories, and one hot question. How did you finally accept your identity and stopped giving a fuck about what others thought? Allow me to share with you stories that inspire. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this new episode of I-Dentit-Is, the podcast. Today, your dear Uncle Rafa did not have to go that far away, and we have been digging around for the ambassador of a sport where you think you'd never see a rainbow flag flying on. Woo! Directly from the racing sport world, let me introduce you our guest. So, name?
Hi, I'm Richard Morris.
Age?
Let's say 25. No, I'm 32.
Okay, even 19 is okay. What do you do in your life?
I drive racing cars and I run a movement called Racing Pride.
And how do you identify?
It's a tricky one, as I'm sure you know, making this podcast. But let's say, so I currently use the term queer a lot more. I used to say gay, but I think I've moved towards queer more. And
okay, so I'm right to say that he, him, and he's are your pronouns, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm sort of using. Do I feel great about those pronouns? Not necessarily. Why do I use them? Well, it's because I think it's really important, you know, to show allyship to particularly the trans non-binary community to use our pronouns. But let's say that, you know, my relationship with them has become more complicated over time as well. And you know, I find it tricky to reduce my gender to just pronouns like he, him, his. But yes, that is what I use.
That is very interesting, I have to be honest. Richard, welcome to I-Dentit-Is, the podcast. And directly from the racing world, we have a professional pilot with a very interesting project, which is called Racing Pride. And we're going to discover some more about this project in a few minutes. Now, you said something very interesting for me. You say you identify more as a queer rather than a gay person. Just how do you explain that?
I mean, it's been a tricky journey for me with that. I used to absolutely hate the term, I've got to say. When I you know, initially sort of came across that term, I didn't like it. I know it used to be used as an insult. I know a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community don't like that term, and for really valid reasons. I've come towards either saying I'm LGBTQ plus or I'm queer or something like that because I find there's a degree of like helpful ambiguity in that. You're not having to put too tight a label on yourself. And I think there's a danger sometimes with labels that you're actually restricting yourself by putting on a label that actually was designed to liberate you and allow you to be yourself. And I started to find that, particularly as I spoke about this really publicly and people started to feel like they kind of knew me, they started to have expectations of how I would be gay and the sort of, you know, how I should be, how I should behave, who I should hang out with, all of that. And so I try to now, I don't like using such specific labels at the moment, but as I'm sure you're aware, identity is a really evolving thing, and that's just how I feel right now.
And that is why we're having this podcast, to talk about identities, like the huge variety of beautiful identities that we get to meet every day. So is there any way that you have to be gay? Like, is there any specific way? Like, have you ever been told, yeah, but you don't look gay?
I mean, I have, particularly being in quite a sort of macho sport, you know, when I've said I'm gay and I've got a boyfriend and all these sorts of things, people have gone, no, you're a racing driver. No, you're not.
You cannot be gay. Come on. Yeah, sure. But wait, let me see if I get this right now, Richard. So you are vice champion of the 2021 Brit Cup. I have to read because it's like an extensive list, so forgive me now. So I said, vice champion of the 2021 Brit Car Endurance Praga Championship Endurance. Wow, what a lovely world, darling. 7 podiums, 3 wins in the 2020 Sports 1000, vice champion in the 2019 RGB Sports 1000. Okay, take your breath. Post 89 class vice champion in the National Championship and Tourist Trophy in the BRSCC, which is not a sexual abbreviation, no worries at all. Formula Ford 1600 National Championship, then 8 pole position, 4 wins in the 2017 Formula Ford 1600 Castle Combe. And between 2009 and 2017, you collected dozens and dozens of other prestigious victories in the kart championships. Now, let me ask you this, darling. Are you also a good cook?
I do cook, actually, to be fair. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but I do cook. I do the cooking in the house.
I have been following you on Instagram, and I've seen that you've been traveling around a lot lately. Look at you. But for whoever doesn't follow you on Instagram, how can they find you?
I'm at Richard Morris Racing on Instagram, and Racing Pride also has a page at Racing Pride HQ.
Great, thank you so much. Now, Richard, I've got like this question. Now, this is not usual, let's say so, to see a queer, gay, whatever you want to define, guy being attracted by such a masculine sport like sports racing. I mean, have you not ever had a dream about being, I don't know, a K-pop member or a ballet dancer, a showman, a professional cook? No?
Yeah, I haven't had those exact dreams. I think they'd be quite interesting, but yeah, I always wanted to get into motorsport. My family always had Formula One on when I was a little kid. I looked around plenty of car racing museums. My favorite uncle used to drive himself just on an amateur level, so I had it around me. I had it on the TV. It was something that I really wanted to do. Although actually the first things that I did before I went racing, I went horse riding and I went fencing and did kind of those types of things. But yeah, I think it was inevitable at some stage I was going to go into motorsport rather than K-pop dancing.
Right. Oh, well, I can see that it's always been something sport and mental related, because you have to be, in peace also with yourself whenever you either ride a horse or you race a car, because then if you get into your mind, then you're... Can I say fact?
It's your podcast, you can say what you like. Yeah, I mean, there is a mental aspect to all sport, and I think it's both, isn't it? Because you have to be able to clear your mind in order to do it, but also, sport can be therapy in a way, can't it? It's, the act of having to clear everything out of your mind, actually is quite healing in itself. So, I've always loved sport. I've always loved pushing myself, trying to focus as much as possible, and clearing everything else out. Because, and people say this, and sometimes they sort of misunderstand it in a way, but they say, when the helmet goes on, everyone's just a driver. So why do you talk about LGBTQ plus stuff? And I go, well, the beauty of the sport is that when everyone puts the helmet on, they are just a driver. And that's one of the, wonderful things about it, that you can cut out all the other noise when you're driving. But we still have to talk about all the other stuff. It's still super important.
We do. We really have to. But from horse riding to motorsport racing, so what was the trigger that let you say, like, you know what? I'm going to be a professional motor pilot.
Yeah, so it was something that I got the opportunity to try first when I was about 12 years old. I went karting at a friend's birthday party, which was a super ordinary way to start. And I was very competitive and managed to win that event, partly because I had no regard for my own safety whatsoever as a little kid. I went from there. I went back to the track because I wanted to get better, and kept just doing that. And then my dad got me a kart, and, it kind of spiraled from there. But it was something that I had in the background sort of as I was growing up, because, as you say, horses were my first love. But then I also was doing fencing up to World Cup level for Great Britain, and that was taking a lot of my time and a lot of my sporting focus. So the motorsport was something sort of on the side. But as I went through, I got to a point where in fencing, I'd achieved everything that I thought I was reasonably going to and that I wanted to. I'd represented my country. I'd won some things with that. I'd won the things that I targeted. And I thought I can keep doing that, but it would never give me time to explore motorsport to the extent I wanted to. So I made that decision in 2017 as I was moving from karting into car racing, that this now had to be a bigger focus in my life if I was going to go and achieve my dreams on that side of things. So I dropped all the other stuff and I went into motorsport.
Great decision. But let me ask you these now. So in the early years of motorsport racing, right, being part of the LGBTQI plus community, did you have to hide your true identity to your colleagues around?
Yeah, so I think everyone's coming out story is a journey, and you're out in different areas of your life at different times and to different people, and there are loads of reasons that you might feel safer or less safe to be out in a particular environment. And I think when I started doing karting, I wasn't really out in any environment,
Right.
But I definitely had the biggest worry about being out in motorsport, because I'd go to shows, motorsport shows, and everything I'd see would be geared towards straight men. It would be, the marketing would be women wearing next to nothing. It would be super macho guys. And the idea was, if you're going to be a quick racing driver, you're going to be into this, you've got to be into this too. This is who you are. This is what a racing driver looks like. And I had that in my mind. And I did have friends. Yeah, exactly. I did have friends in karting who I felt relatively close to, that I could start to mention some of this stuff to in my early teens.
Yeah.
And some of them were good. Some of them said things like, oh, that's okay, but let's not talk about it too much. You know, things that put me off, you know, telling other people. That. Yeah, I had things that...
No, that is so bad. But you said something very interesting. It's like everyone has got a different story when it comes to coming out. What is your coming out story?
I kind of had two attempts at it in motorsport. I had that early one where I started telling some friends, and then I stopped, not because of their reactions necessarily, although it didn't help, obviously, to have people being not necessarily positive about it. And obviously this was quite a long time ago. And the things I heard around the paddock and people using gay as an insult and things like that. Basically, I decided, okay, maybe this isn't going to be the best thing for my motorsport career if I'm out at this stage, and maybe, you know, I won't have the best time if I'm out. So I then went in motorsport back into the closet for a long time. In the rest of my life, it was kind of as I was going to university, I had that open space. It was a really inclusive university environment. I went to, you know, met a boyfriend there, and I felt able to be out in the other aspects of my life. And really, I didn't come out properly in motorsport until I was just starting Racing Pride in late 2018. Because at that stage, I felt, look, I've been out in every other aspect of my life now, and it's just becoming awkward that I'm not out in motorsport. So, you know, I've got to.
But when did you come out to your family?
You know, at different stages. I think, again, you know, that's quite a common story. But around that time when I was at university, basically, you know, I'd known for quite a long time before that, but I hadn't felt ready to take that step until that point.
They were supportive. Did they understand you? What was their reaction? I mean, this is important to share with everyone who's listening to the podcast, because I think it's what makes this podcast unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this aspect, you know, understandably, I was nervous, because obviously they're really, really important people in your life, and you don't want to do anything that would threaten that. That's why I was a bit slow to tell them, was just because of the fear of what their reaction might be in the worst case scenario in my mind. But actually, I've got to say, my family have been enormously supportive, not just of me and my partner and all of these things, but also everything I've done with Racing Pride, and you know, have been the biggest sort of supporters of Racing Pride, which has been really fantastic. That's not to say I wasn't worried first, but it has gone really well.
Yeah, but that is the thing, you know, sometimes we just stop ourselves from being free and telling it to our families, because we just imagine in our heads the very worst scenarios, how things could go the worst way possible. Instead, sometimes we just should be taking it a little bit lighter. Not that I'm saying you don't have to think about what you're doing, but we need to try to be less hard on ourselves. That's it. Now, I do think that we've reached the climax of these interview. And I was like, ooh.
Climax again.
But this is the right moment. I couldn't see actually a better moment for me to ask you this question, which is the main question of I-Dentit-Is, the podcast. So how did you finally accept your identity and stopped giving a fuck about what others thought?
Well, I think, I did this to a large extent, certainly. I wouldn't say I've ever fully understood my identity, because I'm not sure anyone really can. And it's something that I'm still kind of navigating. But certainly in terms of where I was able to be a lot more free and a lot more out when I sort of started Racing Pride, I did it quite dramatically in that, my coming out to a lot of people and to motorsport was founding this massive movement. And it was on, there was a big spread in the magazine that my dad had read every week since I was a little kid that was all about motorsport. It was on Sky Sports. It was, a big thing. So it was kind of hard to rein it back in after that. I just
launched the big stone, say, boom, it's out now.
Yeah, and I felt like, it was just something I had to do. As I say, it had become so difficult to not be myself in motorsport. But also, and what really encouraged me to do what I did with starting Racing Pride was I really genuinely felt it could help other people as well. I felt that I'd for too long been afraid of the reactions in motorsport, and that had coloured my experiences through my teenage years and up to that point, and that I'd missed out on some stuff because of that. And I felt that actually, I'm sure there are lots of really good people around. There are lots of allies. There are lots of people who would understand. And I'm just going to speak to those people and get those people together and bring together the LGBTQ plus community. And then I will have a support network around me, but also other people will as well. And in the future, people will find these things easier because of it. So, I essentially went for that big coming out because I felt not only could it help me, but also it would put in place a support network that just hadn't been there before for people like me.
That is very interesting, I have to be honest, because I've been reading a few interviews that you released a few months or years ago, always about Racing Pride. And before I ask you what is Racing Pride and what is the real aim of this beautiful organization and project that you launched, you said something about representation and identity of the people, the LGBTQI plus people in racing sport. Can you tell us more, please? Because I think it's very important to talk about the representation. Sometimes we are not represented.
Yeah, so there has been a massive lack of representation historically in motorsport. The broader picture, when I was karting, I was on a grid of maybe there were 60 male karters and one girl in the British Championship. I didn't know anyone from ethnic minority communities in karting, really. And I'd never consciously been raced with other LGBTQ plus people. I just didn't have visible people like me around me in karting. In Formula One, there hasn't been, an openly gay male driver ever. We're aware of one gay male driver who came out sort of to some people in the paddock and then was a bit more open after leaving F1. But that was back in the 1970s. And
we're talking about?
So we're talking about Mike Bootler. That was a case of some people in the paddock knew that was about it. And I know there have been some famous racing drivers recently, people like Hurley Haywood, who won Le Mans multiple times, was a big hero in America. He came out after he retired. But while I was growing up, there were no active racing drivers who were LGBTQ plus in any public way. And I didn't see any LGBTQ plus people around me. And one of the really important things that Racing Pride has done is to get together a group of ambassadors. Some are drivers like me, some are engineers, mechanics, officials, media, people in all the roles that go around motorsport, to say, look, there are LGBTQ plus people in this sport. They are actually doing amazing things and having really positive experiences, and to use that as an inspiration to more people to see that they could come into the sport. And it's also been the most incredible support network for me to see that actually I wasn't alone. I just felt alone. And the first race weekend after we launched Racing Pride, I knew the commentator was also a member of Racing Pride. I saw other drivers on the grid putting the Racing Pride stickers on their cars. And it's like, hey, we have always been here. It's just no one started talking about it.
That must have filled you with pride.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, that year I was having a really close battle with a fantastic driver who's now a good friend of mine, a guy called Chippy Wesmail. He was driving for the rival manufacturer. He's an ally. But we'd barely talked before that point, and we were big rivals on track, driving for the two big rival manufacturers. I turned up to race, and he was the first person to come and get a Racing Pride sticker to put on his car. And it was just beautiful to be like, this goes beyond the sport. This is something we can all believe in. And since we've become great friends,
this means supporting someone. But have you always had these positive reactions to Racing Pride?
We've had overwhelmingly positive reactions. There's been huge amounts of support. There have also been difficult conversations, and I can't pretend there haven't been. There have been one or two times when people have openly criticized or resisted or reacted against. A lot more, there have been difficult conversations, I think, behind the scenes of people not being sure if this was something they could support. But overwhelmingly, I think, we have had a massively positive reaction. It's really put LGBTQ plus inclusion on the agenda, which has been really fantastic.
Indeed it is. And I mean, being married to a man who works in Formula One as an engineer, I always hear great things about Racing Pride. He was the one who introduced me to your world. So, bravo to you. Like, very well done with this project. I'm curious to know now, I mean, representation has always been something very important, I think in all sports and in all areas of society, right? And I remember that also pilots like Hamilton used to talk about representation of their own, I would say, their own personality, their own identities in sport, like motor racing. So do you think that what Hamilton has done in so many countries around the world, even in those countries where, being gay means you're going to die, you're not going to have a life, you're going to be persecuted. And so bringing those very profound and strong messages printed on his outfit helped the LGBTQI plus community in motorsport racing?
Yeah, I think having really visible vocal allies at the very top of the sport, like Lewis Hamilton, like Sebastian Vettel was as well, is enormously important. And I found it extremely moving when Sebastian Vettel wore his Same Love t-shirt on the grid in Hungary just after we'd announced the partnership with Aston Martin, and then Lewis started getting involved with his rainbow helmets. And I'd never thought I would see multiple world champions using their platform specifically for the LGBTQ plus community. That was unthinkable even when I started Racing Pride.
That's true. So why still today we need organizations like Racing Pride in motorsport racing environment?
I think what's clear is that there are a lot of allies in motorsport, but that the sport is very early on its journey of LGBTQ plus inclusion and of making people, including inside the sport, feel really able to be themselves. We have seen in the teams that we've worked directly with, people have come out after Racing Pride has started working with the team. People who've perhaps been in the closet in the team for years and never felt able to be openly themselves at work. And this is across the different teams that we've worked with. And that's because there's been this fear of how will I be received? Will people be ready and equipped to support me? All those sorts of questions. And Racing Pride does do a huge amount of work on that behind the scenes. And it really motivates me to hear the stories and have people message me after we've been to talk at factories and so on, saying, I'm going to come out to my colleagues now, and then message me back and go, they were so supportive and it was great. And to know that we've made a difference to people working in the sport, people who live it every single day, that motivates me massively. So for me, a huge part of it is changing and improving the experiences of people who are inside the sport already. And then I think motorsport has this vast platform to inspire, encourage LGBTQ plus people beyond the sport, to make them feel loved, valued, appreciated, understood, inspired. I think why we need this is both because it means a lot to people inside the sport and because the sport can do a lot for people outside of the sport as well.
That's absolutely true. But now, we've been too serious for so long now. We need some gossip time, to spice this thing up. So, do you think there's any gay pilot which is still in the closet in Formula One?
I really don't know about Formula One.
You're so politically correct. Come on. Yes, no. I mean, we're not telling names.
No, I mean, I don't know the drivers well enough to know that. Although I'm very lucky to have met and worked with a number of them now. What's very clear is that we have some fantastic allies on the grid, which is absolutely brilliant.
Who do you think? Because I love you, because you're just blushing now. You're completely red. You don't know how to, but I see the difficulty now. This is just amazing. Who do you think is the hottest F1 driver now?
Wow.
Well, this is also tricky, but I will give
I've got a list.
Yeah.
If you want to. And we could go through the list. And you can say yes, no, maybe, I don't know.
Oh,
but
that
no,
would be
according
so
to
mean. Yeah, I mean, you've got to admit that people like Charles Leclerc and Lando, and there are some really good-looking drivers on the grid. Of course, there are, and just as human beings go, Lewis is just massively attractive as a person because of everything he believes in, everything he stands up for, and I know that it means a lot to a lot of people. But yeah, there are some great looking drivers on the grid, as there should be. They're athletes. They're highly tuned athletes. So
that's what I'm saying. It's not just about driving. It's about being shaped, being trained. You have to train a lot. You have to stand those forces, the gravity. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, it's got to be.
Do I look intelligent now? Yes, I do.
Yeah, G-forces they call it. Yeah,
that's
you've
what
got to
I was
do a lot of training because. And you've got to be light as well as strong. So, it's great for lean tone because you can't be heavy in a race car. It doesn't work.
Of course. Yeah, I agree. And yes, on the names you said before, yes, I agree. I would also add Ricciardo or Ricardo, as people call him.
A lot of people like Ricardo, yeah. Not my type personally, but, a lot of people like it.
No. Well... that knows.
And gossip time is now over.
I could go on for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours talking to you today, but I know that our time online for today has come to an end, unfortunately. But before we wrap up these episodes, what is for you the real trick that can help us accepting who we are and live a peaceful life with ourselves?
I think the most important thing is to realize that your identity is your own to define, and it's nobody else's sort of role to tell you who you are, how you can define yourself, and how you can live. And that's the first step, really, is to realize that identity is something personal that you have control of. And I think also something that evolves. And I talked a little bit earlier in this podcast about how my identity is still evolving, how I term myself is still evolving. And I want to give myself space for that as well. I think that's important, to not force yourself into a box through that. And then to realize that the good people in your life are the people who are going to appreciate and support you, whatever your identity is and however you want to define it. And if people are going to not be in your life because of how you're identifying, they probably weren't the people that you wanted or needed in your life in the first place. So surround yourself with the people who will accept you for who you really are as you understand it at that moment.
That is so good, actually, and so true. Richard, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your wise words, for sharing with us your thoughts, your feelings, and this fantastic project, which is Racing Pride.
It's been great to meet you, and a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Richard. And remember, you are perfect the way you are, so please be unique, be yourself. Don't give a fuck.